Montana Territory, June of 1878, the wind carried dust and whispers as Felicity James stepped off the stagecoach into the middle of nowhere, her belly round with child, her eyes hollow with loss. The town of Bridgers Pass was not known for mercy. Folks stared from behind windows and porch rails, watching her as if she had dragged the devil in with her. She did not blame them much. Word had traveled past the preacher's widow, expecting a child not her husband's. The scandal had reached even the saloon before her boots had touched dirt. No one offered a hand. No one offered a room. She sank onto a bench outside the general store, sweat trickling down her temple, her hands resting protectively over her stomach. Her heart thudded slow and heavy. She had nowhere left to go. "You all right, ma'am?" a voice asked from the edge of her vision. She looked up. A tall man stood a few feet away, hat in hand, dark hair curling behind his ears. His face was sun-browned, his eyes a quiet kind. He was lean, dirt-smudged, and dressed in the plain clothes of a working man. She blinked. No one had spoken to her kindly in weeks. "I reckon I will be," she said, her voice rough. "Eventually. I work out at the Winding Creek Ranch. Name's Weston Vaughn," she nodded slowly. "Felicity James." He looked down, then back up. "You hungry?" "My pride says no," she said, then paused. "But yes, I am." Weston disappeared into the store and came back with a tin of peaches, 2 biscuits, and a canteen. He sat on the bench beside her but left enough space to be polite. She ate without speaking. He did not ask questions. When she finished, she wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "I appreciate the food." He stood. "You got a place to stay?" She looked up at him, her mouth tight. "I do not." He shifted his weight. "Ranch has a bunkhouse, empty one out back. I can talk to the foreman. You would be safe there." "I ain't got a say in much, but I got some." Her throat tightened. "You do not even know me," he shrugged. "Ain't right, a woman in your condition left to rot in the street." Felicity hesitated, then nodded once. "All right." The bunkhouse was plain, 1 bed, 1 stove, and a crooked window that let the light in slanted and soft. It smelled of cedar and dust. Weston left her there with a fresh blanket, a bag of flour, and a quiet promise. "I will check in each morning. Anything you need, you tell me." She watched him go. She did not cry. She had cried herself dry weeks ago. The days passed slow. Weston showed up every morning with something in hand: eggs, apples, clean water. He never lingered long. He never asked about the father. He fixed her door when it stuck. He shooed off the boys who threw rocks. He patched her window before the rain came. Felicity watched him work, her heart aching in a way she had not expected. He was not loud. He was not grand. But there was something steady in the way he moved, like the earth itself. One evening, late in July, she found him out by the barn, brushing down one of the mares. She stopped beside him. "I want to help," she said. He looked over at her, his brow lifting. "You are carrying a whole child." "You do not need to help. I have hands," she said, "and a mind that needs something to do." He nodded slowly, then handed her a second brush. They worked side by side in silence. The sun dipped low, painting the hills in gold. She felt the baby shift inside her and laid a hand over her belly. Weston noticed. His eyes softened. "Boy or girl, you think?" She smiled faintly. "Feels like a girl, wild and restless." "Good," he said. "This world could use more wild girls." She looked at him then, really looked, and something inside her shifted. By August, the town had started whispering again, but this time about him. The ranch hand who kept the widow company. The man who stood by a woman shamed by her own church. Weston ignored it all. One morning, she found a basket by her door. Inside were baby clothes, hand-sewn, with a note in a woman's careful scrawl, "For your little one. No child should come into this world without a welcome." Felicity held the tiny garments to her chest. She did not know who had made them, but she knew who had made it possible: Weston. The child came on a stormy night in September. Weston was the only one who stayed when the midwife refused to come. He boiled water. He held her hand. He whispered soft, steady words while she screamed through the pain. When the baby arrived, pink and wailing, Weston wrapped her in a clean towel and placed her in Felicity's arms. "She is perfect," he said. Felicity looked up at him, tears finally spilling. "Her name is Marigold," he smiled. "Marigold Vaughn has a nice ring to it," she blinked. "What?" He hesitated, then knelt beside her bed. "I know I ain't much, but I want to give you and her a name, a home. I want to marry you, Felicity, if you will let me." She stared at him. Her heart beat loud in her ears. He looked scared, truly scared. "You want to marry a woman carrying another man's child?" He looked at the baby, then back at her. "I want to marry you and raise her like my own." Felicity pressed her hand to his cheek. "You surprised me, Weston Vaughn." He covered her hand with his own. "I hope I keep doing that," she nodded slowly. "Yes, the answer is yes." The wedding was quiet, held on a Sunday afternoon with the yellowing grass brushing at Felicity's hem. There was no preacher willing to stand for them, so Weston asked an old circuit judge who lived out by the cottonwoods. The man read the vows slow and steady, his voice worn like gravel after rain. Marigold slept in Felicity's arms through the whole thing, her tiny mouth twitching once or twice like she already dreamed. Felicity wore a blue cotton dress Weston had traded a month's wages for. It was too fine for a ranch hand's wife, but he'd chosen it from the trading post shelf with the same care he used breaking Colt's quiet, patient sure. "You want a ring?" Weston asked as they stood beneath the open sky, hands joined. "I want you," she said. "That's more than I ever thought I'd have again." They didn't kiss in front of the judge. Not because they didn't want to, but because they didn't need to prove anything to anyone but each other. Afterward, Weston built a small lean-to off the side of the bunkhouse. It wasn't much, but it kept the wind off, and it gave them a place to string laundry and hang herbs. Felicity had started drying from the creekside patches she walked to with the baby strapped close. She didn't speak of the past anymore, and Weston didn't ask. Some hurts were like fence posts buried in stone, best left where they stood. One evening, Weston came in with a long scratch down his forearm and a limp in his left leg. "What happened?" Felicity asked, reaching for the tin of salve without waiting. "Bull calf got loose. Thought he was bigger than he is. Got a kick in before I could rope him." "You're lucky it wasn't your ribs," she said, dabbing the wound with clean cloth. "I am lucky," he said, watching her hands, "in more ways than one." She paused, her fingertips still on his skin. "You really mean that?" "I never say what I don't mean." They sat quiet after that, the lamp flickering low between them. Marigold breathed soft from her cradle. Outside, the coyotes called from the ridge, their song distant and thin. "I've been thinking," Weston said finally, "about buying a patch of land. North slope past the creek. There's a flat stretch there, good for building." Felicity looked over. "You want to leave the ranch, not today, not next month, but I want a place that's ours. A home that belongs to you and Marigold as much as me." She folded her hands in her lap. "No one's ever asked what I wanted before, I'm asking now." She looked down at her daughter, then back up. "Then yes, I want that, I want all of it." That winter they worked side by side. Weston taught Felicity to patch tack and check the fences for weak spots. She showed him how to stir cornmeal mush so it didn't burn and how to sew buttons back on when his shirts gave out. Inside their small space, laughter started to bloom, quiet at first, like spring water beneath ice, but steady. One morning, as the frost painted the window panes and the stove crackled with cedar bark, Weston lifted Marigold from her cradle and cradled her against his chest, humming something wordless under his breath. "She likes you better than me most days," Felicity said, tying back her hair. "She knows who stayed," he said. Felicity crossed the floor and rested her head against his shoulder, her hand over his where it cupped their daughter's back. "I used to think I'd never feel safe again," she whispered. He kissed the crown of her head. "You are now," and she was. Not because the world had changed, but because against all odds, someone had stood beside her long enough for her to plant her feet again. The thaw came slow that year. Snow melted in patches, bearing earth hardened by months of cold. Weston took to rising early, clearing brush near the north slope with a borrowed mule and a rusted plow he'd traded for tobacco, and a spare bridle. Felicity watched him from the ridge sometimes. Marigold tucked against her hip, her bonnet tied snug beneath her chin. He moved with quiet purpose, sleeves rolled, jaw set, not rushing, not stopping. One morning she brought him bread wrapped in a cloth and a jar of pickled carrots she'd put up in the fall. He leaned against the fence post and took the food without a word, his fingers brushing hers. She didn't pull away. "You doing all this for me?" she asked. He chewed slow, then swallowed. "I'm doing it for us." Felicity looked at the cleared patch of land. It wasn't much yet, just stubbled ground and a half-built frame, but it had shape, promise. "Ever built a house yourself before?" she asked. "No," he said, reaching for the jar. "But I've helped raise 3, I know enough." She sat beside him on a stump, brushing sawdust off her skirt. "And what do you want it to look like?" He considered that. "Big enough for her to run without knocking into things. A porch where you can sit and watch the sun set. A stove that heats proper. That's all." He looked over at her. "And a door that only I get to open at night." Felicity flushed and turned her face toward the wind. That spring, the ranch shifted. The foreman's wife fell ill, and Felicity offered to help without being asked. She brought broth and boiled linens, checked on the woman's breathing with her own child swaddled across her chest. Weston didn't speak of it, but she noticed how the men stopped looking away when she passed. The blacksmith's girl brought her a spool of thread wrapped in gingham. One of the milk cows got named Marigold. Late April brought a letter from Helena. Felicity opened it with care, her hands steady despite the return address. Her sister's name sat curled in the corner of the envelope like it had been holding its breath. "They want to visit," she said that evening, laying the letter on the table. Weston was stripping bark from a cedar limb for fence repair. He paused, blade still in hand. "You want them to?" he asked. "I don't know." She brushed wood shavings from the floor. "We haven't spoken since before I left Kansas City. She didn't even come to the funeral." He waited. "She says she wants to meet Marigold," Felicity went on. "Says I deserve some forgiveness." "Do you need it?" he asked. She turned to face him. "Maybe not, but I wouldn't mind the try." He nodded once. "Then we'll make room." The sister arrived on a Tuesday, her dress finer than Felicity remembered, her gloves too tight for the heat. She stepped from the stage with a guarded look, but softened when Marigold reached for her curls. "She has your eyes," she said. "Only thing she got from me," Felicity said. "The rest is her own." That night, the 3 of them sat around the fire. Weston kept mostly quiet, his hands busy sanding the baseboards for the new house. Felicity's sister watched him, a question in her brow. "You married him?" she asked finally. "I did." The woman looked at Weston. "And you took her in, with another man's child." He didn't look up. "Didn't seem right to leave her alone." Silence fell. Then the sister said, "Well, seems to me you've got more sense than most men I've met." Felicity exhaled. By the time her sister left, she'd stitched a dress for Marigold and asked to come again in the fall. In early May, Weston nailed the final plank to the porch step. Felicity stood in the doorway, Marigold toddling between her legs, her hands outstretched for balance. "You ready to move in?" he asked. Felicity looked behind her at the bunkhouse where they'd folded so many quiet nights into each other, then turned back to the house where the wind no longer whistled through the cracks. "We're home," she said. That night, as the oil lamp flickered low and the crickets sang outside the open window, Weston pulled the quilt up around them. "You ever think," she murmured, "how strange it is that kindness could build a life?" He kissed her temple, slow and sure. "No," he said. "I think it's the only thing that ever really does." By mid-June, the wild roses bloomed along the creek, and the new house had settled into itself like it had always been part of the ridge. Felicity kept the windows open most days, letting the wind carry in the scent of pine and warm soil. Marigold had taken to crawling beneath the table while Felicity shelled peas, her palms pressed flat to the floor, chasing the patterns of shadow. Weston came through the door one afternoon with a folded paper in his hand, his shirt damp with sweat, a streak of sawdust along his jaw. He set the paper on the table without speaking, then filled the kettle from the basin and poured it over his hands to rinse the grime away. "What's that?" Felicity asked, nodding toward it. Land grant certificate. Came from the county seat, he said, drying his hands on the back of his trousers. It's ours now, all of it, signed and sealed. Her hands stilled over the peas. You didn't tell me you were sending for papers. I wanted to be sure first. No sense speaking on something before it's done. She reached for the paper and unfolded it on the table. Her name sat beneath his, written in clean ink. Her breath caught, but she kept her voice even. I never thought I'd see my name tied to land. You've earned it, he said, sitting down across from her. You've worked it same as I have. Felicity traced the edge of the page with one finger, then looked up. What will we do with it? All that stretch down to the hollow? Plant oats, maybe, or let it go to hay this season, could put up a second barn come fall. She watched him. You always think that far ahead, he leaned forward, elbows on the table. Only since I had someone to think ahead with. That night, she sat on the porch while Weston carved a yoke for the oxen. The sky turned the color of coal ash, and the first fireflies blinked near the fence. Marigold slept in her cradle inside, her breath even and soft. Your hands look different, Weston said, nodding toward her lap. Felicity looked down. Her fingers were rougher now, the nails trimmed close, skin freckled from sun. They're useful now, she said. Not just soft for someone else to hold, he set the chisel down. I like them soft, I like them now too. She turned her face toward the dark. Do you ever miss how things were before? No, he said. I was just waiting to get here. In the weeks that followed, they began to build habits without meaning to. Weston left his boots beside the door instead of outside, and Felicity learned to rise with the first bird call, her hands already moving toward the kettle before her eyes had opened fully. Marigold pulled herself up using the leg of the table, babbling at the dog Weston had taken in after it followed him back from the ridge one morning. One evening, Weston returned from the far field with a red welt across his cheekbone. Felicity met him at the stoop, wiping her hands on her apron. What was it? Fence post snapped, caught me in the face. She touched the edge of the bruise gently. You need to stop working alone out there. You offering to come with me, if I have to tie the baby to my back and march through the field, I will, he laughed, but it came out quiet. I believe you. Later, after supper, she sat beside him while he rubbed linseed oil into the handle of a new spade. She watched the way his hands moved, slow and certain, and said, You know, I don't think I ever asked what made you come up to me that first day. He didn't look up. Seemed like someone should. That's not an answer. He turned the spade over in his lap. I watched you step down from that coach like you were already bracing for the worst, and I thought if I walked away, then the worst would win. She was quiet a long while. Then you ever regret it? No, he said. Not even for a breath. She reached across and took his wrist, her fingers wrapping around the place just above his hand. I don't either. That night she lay beside him, the room filled with the soft creak of summer boards and the distant call of a night bird. He brushed his thumb along her shoulder, not for comfort, just to remind himself he could. And she turned toward him, her eyes open in the dark. I love you, Weston, she said, her voice low. He didn't answer right away. Then he reached for her hand and brought it to his chest, where his heart beat steady and strong. I know, he said. And I love you right back. Outside, the wind shifted through the grass, and inside their small house held the warmth of two people who'd built something from the ashes of what was lost. By late summer, the oats had rooted well in the back stretch of the field, and Weston spent his mornings stringing wire across the new fence line, the sun burning the back of his neck through his shirt. Felicity, carrying Marigold on her hip while she walked the field edges, had started gathering wild mint and yarrow, tying them in bundles to dry by the window. The child had begun pulling herself up by the porch rail, babbling as she tried to balance, her hands clinging stubbornly to the wood. One evening, after the supper plates had been washed and stacked, Weston handed Felicity a folded square of linen from his coat pocket. Found this behind the tack shed, he said. Thought it might be yours. She unfolded it carefully. It's from the satchel I had when I arrived. I thought it was lost. It had your initials stitched in the corner, figured it meant something. She held it a moment longer, then laid it flat on the table. My mother embroidered that when I left home to marry. It was meant for my dowry chest. He rested his hand on the table beside hers. You want to write her, let her know where you are now. She passed before Marigold was born, Felicity said, smoothing the linen with her palm. But I think she'd have liked it here. Weston didn't answer. He reached for her fingers and kissed the knuckles, one after the other, the way he did when words weren't enough. As September turned, a letter arrived from the foreman. The ranch had been sold, the new owner coming from back east. Weston read the words slowly, his thumb pressed hard into the paper's edge. They're letting the hands go, he said. Except for two, Felicity waited, they offered me a place. Work, feed, long hours, but no land, no chance to build. She kept her voice calm. Would you want to stay if we weren't here? He folded the letter once, then again. I'd want to be where you are. That's the only part that matters. They spent the next few days walking the property line, measuring out rows with sticks and twine. Weston drove posts along the south side of the field, planning for chickens come spring. Felicity marked a space for squash and beets. They worked without hurry, not because the tasks were easy, but because they no longer felt rushed. The house stood now, solid and theirs. The land beneath it had their names carved into county records, and each furrow Weston turned held the beginning of something they would eat, raise, or give one morning. While Weston was patching the back porch where a board had warped from rain, Felicity came to him with a folded sheet of paper. I've been thinking about teaching, she said. Just part-time. There's a schoolhouse a few miles north. They don't have a regular teacher. He leaned back on his heels. You'd be good at it. I'd need to bring Marigold, at least until she's older, but I could teach the younger ones. Reading, maybe penmanship. You sure you want to? I do. I didn't think I'd ever want to do anything again that asked for more than survival, but I've got more in me now. He stood and brushed off his hands. Then we'll make it work. I can take her when you're teaching if the chores are light. Or we'll build a cradle board she can nap in at the school, she smiled. You really mean that? I married you, didn't I? He said, brushing a lock of hair from her cheek. Means I married all your hopes too. In October, the first frost came early. Weston split wood by the stack, and Felicity lined the pantry with jars sealed tight from the harvest. Marigold had started taking steps between them, unsteady but determined. Each time she stumbled, Weston crouched low and held out his hands, steadying without catching, letting her find her own feet. One night after the fire had burned down low, Felicity whispered, You ever think about having another? He turned toward her slowly. Child, she nodded. I'd raise a dozen if they were yours. She laughed quietly against his shoulder. Let's start with one more. Weston tilted her chin up. I'll take whatever comes, so long as I get to keep waking up beside you. That winter, snow came deep and clean. While the land slept, Felicity sent a letter to the schoolhouse and received one back, asking her to begin in spring. Weston began building a second cradle, and Marigold learned to say Papa clear and sure, her voice carrying through the walls like sunlight through frost. The nights were long, but never cold. Not with Felicity's hand resting soft in Weston's and the sound of their daughter dreaming near the hearth. They spoke little in those hours, but everything that mattered had already been said not in words, but in the life they'd built, the field they'd cleared, the house they'd made warm and enduring. Years passed, but their days never lost their shape. Felicity taught twice a week in the schoolhouse, Marigold trailing behind her, now bright-eyed and sharp-tongued like her mother. Weston raised chickens, traded lumber for seed, and carved toys for the girls when the evenings stretched long. They added another daughter, Hazel, born with hair dark as river stone and lungs full of spirit. And in time, a son, Caleb, quiet and observant, always watching his father's hands and listening to his mother's stories. The land held steady beneath them. The seasons circled, and the fences weathered gray, and the porch boards creaked under the weight of growing feet and aging boots. And through it all, Weston and Felicity stayed as they'd begun. Side by side, their love not loud, not showy, but rooted deep, like cottonwoods by the creek weathered, strong, and never letting go.